This episode is brought to you by Backman's Cookies.
Winter camp. All right, welcome back to Bible Time. This is episode 41. You guys know the drill. If you have not paused this video already to read Psalm 11 and to pray over it with your family, go ahead and do that now. All right, so let's get into it. We've got our superscription here for the choir director, a Psalm of David. Very familiar, especially in the early part of the book of Psalms. So far, almost everything, if not every, I think every psalm we've done so far has been authored by David. So that's familiar for us. So starting off here in verse 1, we have, "In the Lord I take refuge." In the Lord I take refuge. This word refuge, it's the intro to Psalm 7. It reminds me of Psalm 5, verse 11, where we see that those who take refuge in you are glad. And that ultimately goes back to Psalm 2, verse 12, which says that the blessed is the man who takes refuge in you. Right? So this confession in the beginning, this very first line, is David's confession of trust to the Lord. In you, Lord, we have the proper name here for Yahweh. Reminds us of Exodus, specifically Exodus 3, and when God is telling Moses that his name is I Am, and that he shall be known as Yahweh, that is his name for generations forever. So here's the scenario we have in the second half of this verse. David's asking, how can you say to my soul, flee as a bird to your mountain? He's asking his counselors, these people are giving him advice, telling him to flee as a bird. And he's saying, how can you be giving me this advice? How can you be saying to my soul to flee in times of trouble? What his counselors should be saying, what his friends, what those around him should be saying, is to remember the promises of God, to trust God. I think specifically about even Exodus 14, verse 14, we get this idea where Israel's about to cross over the Red Sea, and they're being pursued by Pharaoh and his army, and they're afraid, and God tells them that he fights for them, and all they need to do is be still. They don't need to do anything but trust him. Right? So in this time of fear with the enemy surrounding, his counselor should be telling him to trust the Lord, that God fights for you. Again, we see this idea that God fights for you in Deuteronomy chapter 1, verses 29 through 30, and even again throughout the book of Joshua. So this is what they should be reminding him of. They should be reminding David of 2 Samuel 7, the promises that David has from God. But instead, these bad counselors are saying, flee as a bird to your mountain, a mountain where men flee for refuge. All right, this is where men flee for battle. They go to a high point to have the advantage, and this is what a man would do. But someone who's trusting the Lord can trust that even in crazy circumstances, God can provide and save them. And they don't need to trust their own efforts. That's what they should be reminding him of. Right, so why are these people giving him bad advice? Well, this is kind of the problem here. Verses 2 through 3 is the scenario. David says, "For the wicked bend the bow, they make ready their arrow upon the string, to shoot in darkness at the upright in heart." Right? So this problem is that the wicked are surrounded, right? Their bows are already bent. Their arrows are ready upon the string. This idea that the danger is immediate, right? It's close, it's near. We're at the end here. And that's the fear. Right? It doesn't say that they shoot. Their plan is to shoot in the darkness. Darkness being this ambiguous, kind of fearful, deceptive. You can't be prepared for it. You can't see the enemy, but you know they're there. Right? And their targets are the upright in heart, the righteous. Right? These enemies are coming to get the righteous. And here's this fear: is this, if the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? Right, this fear that, okay, if the enemies are so close and it's so pressing that you're afraid of the foundations being destroyed, right? The last thing to be destroyed is the foundations. You think about a building or a wall. That means that if your fear is that the lowest point of the building, the lowest point of your stronghold, the most fundamental part of it is going to be destroyed, then that's the end, right? And that's what they're afraid of. And the question is, what can the righteous do? What is our hope? And what does the next verse say? It says that Yahweh is in his holy temple, and that Yahweh's throne is in heaven. Right? That our hope is that we have a God who not only reigns in Jerusalem and not only reigns in heaven, but both. Right? That he has all authority over the whole earth and that he is actually with his people. What fear would you have no matter how many enemies surrounded you if you truly believe that the presence of God and his favor was in your city protecting you? This is the hope that David has. Right? And this also just this reminder that his eyes behold, his eyes see. God is not a God who created and is far away and is in heaven and doesn't know what's going on earth. Right? He's in his holy temple, check. He's in heaven, check. And because of that, he sees. And not only does he see, but from what he sees, his eyelids test. Right? They test the genuineness. The genuineness. God discerns. God knows the hearts of men. Right? It says that he tests the sons of men. When I think of sons of men, I think immediately going back to Psalm 8, where we ask the question, who is man? Right? That you are mindful of him. Who is man that, you give him power and dominion? I think also of Psalm 9, verse 20, where we get this appeal that the judgment would be rightly brought on the men. Right? This again in chapter 10, verse 18. We keep just getting this appeal to God to deal with men and to remind them that God is God and man is man. And this is a reminder that God sees all that the wicked do. He sees all this stuff, and he will test the sons of men. Right? The Lord tests the righteous and the wicked. He's the one that determines who is right and who is not. Right? He will discern. He will protect his people. He is the proper judge, as we've seen so many times in the Psalms. And the one who loves violence, his soul hates. Right? The one who loves violence, I think of really Psalms 3 through 7, Psalms 9 and 10. All these times where David's appealing for God to deal with his enemies. And all these ones who love violence. Who are the ones who love violence but the ones that are described in Psalm 10, right? The wicked ones who are waiting for the innocent and waiting for the weak to attack them, take advantage. And it says that God hates those, right? Again, I think of Psalm 5, Psalm 5 through 6 even, that God abhors the wicked and he hates those who do evil, right? So God is just, and he's not just a just God who's far off. He's a just God who's here and sees everything. Right? That's the hope that David has. That's why he doesn't need advice to flee. He just needs to be reminded who God is so that he can trust him. Right? And what is God ultimately going to do? It says, upon the wicked, he will rain snares, fire and brimstone, and burning wind will be the portion of their cup. Right? All this really all this language is a summation of all these different ideas of the judgment of God. I even think of rain. The first thing that comes to my mind is like Noah's flood, right? Noah's flood, when God brought rain as a judgment on man. This word for snares is related to, it's really just the idea of what you would use to catch birds, right? And David just said, why are my counselors telling me to flee like a bird to the mountains? And God says, trust me, I'm actually going to bring and capture all these enemies and judge them with bird traps. I'm going to rain snares on them. Right? So he's going to reverse the fate of David for his people. Fire and brimstone, this is the same language of Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah, burning wind. Burning wind, what do we see in Psalm 2? It says that the wicked won't stand because they are like chaff in the wind. And if God brings a burning wind, they will not stand. The portion of their cup, this idea of a cup is that God will bring the fullness, the full summation of judgment upon his enemies. For the Lord, this is the reason, this is why. For the Lord is righteous. This is who God is. This is his very nature. This is the essence of who God is. The Lord is righteous, and therefore he loves righteousness, right? Not wickedness. He loves righteousness, and those who are upright will behold his face. Those who are upright will behold his face. Now, Jesus tells us in John 6, chapter 6, verse 46, that no one has seen the Father except the Son. right? So we know that Jesus is the only one who in and of himself is upright. And our hope is that by Christ's righteousness imputed to us, by nothing that we have done, by the fact that Christ lived a perfect life, he lived a life that God loves because of his righteousness, that we get the imputed righteousness of Christ. And when God sees us, he sees what Jesus did. He sees Jesus' work on the cross, his life, his death, his resurrection, and that is our hope. So that means that we can be considered upright, because I think each one of us, if we know in our heart of hearts, if we look at our life, we know that we cannot be classified as those who are upright. And if we can't, then we have no hope of being those who get to see God's face, to be in his presence. But because of Jesus, we do. And that's our hope, even from this psalm, to see that our hope isn't that we can run and flee from problems, but that we have a righteous and just God who doesn't just deal with our enemies, but who dealt with the ultimate enemy, which is sin, and he will destroy death, and we will be raised. That's our hope. So we'll have some questions with Tommy right after this.
All right, episode 41. Just one question for you today on Question Time with Tommy, and that is, why does Jesus' righteousness give us hope that we will behold God one day? All right, that's it for Friday's episode, and we'll see you tomorrow with Andrew again for Psalm 12. Psalm 12. All right, that's it.